Odysseus, clever and cunning. Odysseus is the kind of character that everyone knows. He is a true symbol of intelligence, cunning, and incredible perseverance. His adventures are described in two cool poems by Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. In the first, he fights as a real hero, and in the second, we see him already in the role of a traveler who is trying to return home after years of war near Troy. Imagine the small island of Ithaca, where the son of Laertes and Anticlea was born. Already from an early age, Odysseus stood out among his peers with his sharp mind and ingenuity. But the most interesting thing is that even before he became a legendary hero, he became the talk of the town thanks to one important invention. The fact is that it was Odysseus who came up with the idea to build the first real ship capable of sailing the seas. Until then, people could only travel by land or rivers, but to go to the open sea? No, it had never been thought of. And then this guy shows up, builds his ship, and opens a new era in the history of mankind. You could say that without him, we'd still be walking or rowing along the coast. When the Trojan War broke out, Odysseus, frankly, was not at all eager to get involved. He realized how dangerous it was, and he had plenty of worries at home. So he decided to play a trick. He pretended to be crazy, hoping to be left alone. Imagine, he plows the land. But instead of a plow, he ties salt to the wagon. Who does that? But the trouble is, Palamedes was too perceptive. To check whether Odysseus had really lost his mind, he went to the extreme. He put Odysseus' little son Telemachus right in the path of the plow. There was no choice. If Odysseus continued his game, the child could die. He had to confess that he was not mad at all, but just wanted to avoid war. So he had to take up arms and go to war with the rest of the Greeks. In the war itself, Odysseus showed himself a real master of strategy and diplomacy. His brain was working around the clock, coming up with plans that helped the Greeks move forward. But his most famous move came near the end of the siege of Troy. Imagine this. The city is impregnable, and no matter how many times you try to storm it, nothing works. What to do? That's when Odysseus came up with an ingenious plan: to build a huge wooden horse inside which the best Greek soldiers would hide. The Trojans, thinking it's a gift from the gods, drag it into the city. At night, when everyone is asleep, the warriors will go outside and open the gates to the rest of the Greeks. The clouds were gathering over the Greek camp. Siege vehicles broke down one after another. Arrows ran out faster than they could be delivered, and each day brought new casualties. The war had been going on for 10 years, and no one believed in success anymore. Even the most experienced warriors began to lose hope. But one evening, when fatigue and frustration had reached their limit, Odysseus quietly approached the campfire around which the commanders had gathered. His face was concentrated, his eyes burning with an unusual fire. "My friends," he began, looking each one in the eye, "I know how to take Troy." Agamemnon frowned, looking around at the others incredulously. "How? How many plans have we tried before, and all have failed?" "Yes, but this plan is different from all the previous ones," Odysseus interrupted him. "We'll build a huge wooden horse. Inside it, we'll hide our best men. The Trojans will see it and think it's a gift from us. They'll drag it into the city, thinking they've defeated us. And at night our warriors will get off their horse and open the gates of the city to us." For a moment there was silence. Then came the laughter of Achilles. "Are you serious? A wooden horse? They'll know it's a trap." "They won't," Odysseus replied confidently, "because we'll pretend to leave the camp, leaving the horse behind. Let them think we've given up. And then, when night falls on Troy, our men will fulfill their task." Menelaus thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It's risky, but there's no other way. Let's try it." The work began immediately. The Greeks gathered wood in secret, working day and night. Each blow of the hammer echoed in the hearts of the warriors. Each piece of wood became part of their last hope. The horse grew in front of their eyes, becoming more and more imposing and formidable. Finally, the day came when the work was completed. The huge figure of the horse towered over the camp like a living creature. Inside it, hidden from prying eyes, awaited the best fighters of Greece. Night had fallen on the battlefield. The camp of the Greeks was deserted. It seemed as if they had really gone. The Trojans, confident of their victory, opened the wooden gate and dragged the horse into the city. Celebrations continued through the night, wine flowed by the river, and the people of Troy rejoiced in the long-awaited peace. But in the depths of the night, as the city fell into slumber, the door of the horse opened slightly. Shadows slipped out of the darkness, Greek warriors armed to the teeth. Silently, like ghosts, they crept to the gates of Troy and swung them open. Outside waited the rest of the squad. The Greeks burst into the city and unleashed all their fury and power on the Trojans. The battle was short and brutal. By morning, Troy lay in ruins and the Greeks were finally victorious. The plan had worked perfectly, and so ended a 10-year war. Troy had fallen and the Achaeans were victorious. This moment has gone down in history as an example of Odysseus' great cunning and strategic thinking. That's how cunning and cleverness can change the outcome of an entire war. After the end of the war, Odysseus, of course, thought that now he would definitely return home to his wife Penelope and son Telemachus. But, as they say, man assumes and the gods dispose. Fate decided to give him a real test of endurance and wisdom. The journey home turned into a real marathon, stretching for 10 years. Imagine, 10 years of wandering across seas and lands, meeting all sorts of creatures and situations that make your hair stand on end. And that's not all. There were encounters with wind kings, journeys through underwater realms, battles with monsters and monstrosities. It seemed that each obstacle was more difficult than the previous one, but Odysseus did not give up. He used his knowledge, wit, and courage to overcome all difficulties. These 10 years became for him a real school of survival and a test of character. Each adventure hardened his spirit and made him stronger. But most importantly, he never lost faith that one day he would return home to his family. The sea was stormy and the waves were hitting the side of the ship like a hammer on an anvil. Odysseus' crew held on as best they could, clinging to the masts and sails, but the storm continued to grow. Suddenly, an island appeared ahead, a piece of land that seemed to float out of the fog. Tired and soaked to the skin, they dropped anchor and hurried ashore. The beach was deserted, but soon they noticed a path leading into the interior of the island. Should they go on or not? The decision was difficult, but thirst and hunger took over. The path led them to a huge cave, the size of which boggled the imagination. The interior was dark, but the light of torches illuminated the piles of cheese, barrels of milk, and carcasses of meat hanging from hooks. "Hey boys, I think we're in luck," exclaimed one of the sailors, grabbing a piece of cheese. It didn't take long for the others to talk themselves into it. They had barely had time to eat when there was a loud rumble. A block of stone blocked the exit from the cave, and Cyclops, a gigantic one-eyed giant with a face contorted with anger, stood before them. "Who are you?" he roared, glaring with his one eye. Odysseus quickly assessed the situation. If he told his real name, there was a good chance that the Cyclops would recognize him and decide to kill the crew. He had to think of something. "My name is Nobody," Odysseus answered calmly. The Cyclops chuckled, apparently taking the answer as a joke. But as he turned his back, Odysseus noticed his hand clench into a fist. Something told him that this meeting was not going to end well. During the night, as everyone fell asleep, eerie sounds, the crunching of bones and the giant's ragged breathing, rang out in the darkness. Odysseus and the remaining members of his crew froze in horror, realizing that their comrades were becoming food for this monster. One by one, they disappeared into the Cyclops' jaws, and the hope of rescue was melting away with every passing moment. Odysseus was not about to give up. He found a long stake and, after waiting for the Cyclops to fall asleep, he and the rest of the men set it on fire. Gathering the last remnants of courage, they approached the sleeping Cyclops and forcefully thrust the red-hot stake directly into his only eye. The Cyclops' scream broke the silence of the night. He flailed around the cave, waving his arms blindly, but he couldn't catch anyone. The other Cyclopes, hearing the noise, came running to help, but Polyphemus only repeated. Nobody did it. Those, not understanding what was happening, decided that their friend simply went crazy and left him. Now they had to find a way out of the cave. Odysseus remembered that there were sheep standing in the corner. Quickly tying the rest of the crew under the belly of the animals, he ordered them to crawl to the exit. He himself grasped the wool of the last ram. In the morning, when Polyphemus let the flock out to graze, he groped the backs of each sheep, but Odysseus and his men managed to leave the cave unnoticed. When they were already at a safe distance from the shore, Odysseus could not stand it and shouted, "It was I, Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who blinded you." The Cyclops' anger was boundless. He picked up a huge rock and hurled it toward the ship. The rock fell nearby, creating a powerful wave that nearly capsized the ship. Odysseus and his crew miraculously escaped death. But their joy was premature. Polyphemus appealed to his father, Poseidon, god of the sea, asking for revenge for him. After Odysseus and his crew miraculously escaped the Cyclopes, their journey continued. The sea became their enemy again, tossing the ship from side to side like a toy. But one day, when the storm subsided, they saw an island in the distance, with a dense forest and high cliffs. Once on the shore, Odysseus and his men were relieved. It was quiet and peaceful, no sign of danger. But soon they met the nymph Calypso. Her beauty was so dazzling that Odysseus instantly lost his head. She invited him to her palace, full of luxury and pleasure, and offered to stay with her forever. Calypso promised Odysseus eternal youth and immortality if he agreed to be her lover. 7 long years passed like a blink of an eye. The island became a place of pleasure and peace for Odysseus, but his heart was still drawn home to his wife Penelope and son Telemachus. Every evening, sitting on the shore, Odysseus looked at the horizon, remembering his home. Sometimes tears rolled down his cheeks as he imagined his wife waiting for his return and his son growing up without a father. But Calypso would not let him go, assuring him that he would be happy with her forever. Days, months, years passed. Then one day, as Odysseus stood on the shore again, thinking about his home, he heard a soft whisper. It was Athena, the goddess of wisdom and Odysseus' patroness. She appeared to him in the form of a bird and said, "Odysseus, your suffering is heard on Olympus. Zeus has had mercy and decided to free you, but you will have to build a raft yourself and set out on your journey." Odysseus' heart began to beat faster. His hope of returning home was renewed. He thanked Athena and set to work. Day after day he gathered wood, wove ropes, and built the raft. Calypso could see that he was busy with something important, but did not interfere, hoping that he would change his mind. Finally, the raft was ready. Odysseus was about to say goodbye to Calypso, but she stood before him with a pleading look in her eyes. "Stay, my beloved," she whispered. "I cannot live without you." But Odysseus was adamant. He kissed her tenderly and said, "Forgive me, my beautiful nymph, but my place is at home with my family. Farewell." With these words, he pushed the raft away from the shore and headed out to the open sea. There were many more trials ahead of him, but now he knew that the gods were on his side and nothing could stop him on his journey home. Odysseus' journey home continued, and each new day brought new challenges. A mysterious island appeared on the horizon, shrouded in mist. The ship drew nearer, and suddenly the air was filled with melodious sounds, gentle, tantalizing, as if calling to a fairyland. They were sirens, creatures whose voices would mesmerize anyone who heard them. Odysseus knew of their cunning. The sirens lure sailors with their songs, and they lose their minds and steer their ships right onto sharp rocks where they perish in the waves. But he wasn't about to become another victim. Having thought of a plan, he ordered his men to fill their ears with wax so that they could not hear the sweet sounds. He asked them to tie themselves to the mast so that they could hear the song but not be able to succumb to it. As the ship passed the island, the sounds grew louder and louder. The voices of the sirens penetrated the soul, promising happiness, peace, and answers to all questions. Odysseus felt his mind begin to cloud, his hands reaching for the ropes to free himself and jump into the water. But the strong knots held him, and the crew, deaf to the songs, continued to row forward. They passed the island, and the sounds gradually subsided. Odysseus breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that they were almost lost. But a new danger awaited them ahead. A narrow strait appeared on the horizon, with high cliffs on either side. There lived two terrible creatures, Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla was a six-headed monstrous dog, capable of capturing and devouring anyone who happened to be nearby. Charybdis, on the other hand, was a whirlpool that would swallow up anything caught in its vortex. Odysseus knew it was impossible to pass between them unscathed. He had to choose the lesser evil. As he passed by Scylla, he lost several of his men, who she grabbed with her clawed paws. But despite the loss, he preferred it to the terrible maelstrom of Charybdis, which could have destroyed the entire ship. The strait was left behind, and though the crew had suffered losses, they kept moving forward. Odysseus realized that every minute brought him closer to home, and no obstacle could break his will. The long-awaited moment had arrived. After 10 years of wandering and countless trials, Odysseus finally saw the native shores of Ithaca. His heart beat faster as he stepped onto the land where his childhood had passed, where his wife Penelope and son Telemachus remained. But the joy of his return was overshadowed by what he learned. His home had been taken over by Penelope's suitors. So here it is, the moment of truth. Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, entered his own home, ready to reclaim what was rightfully his. The palace was filled with suitors who acted like true masters, enjoying wealth and power that didn't belong to them. The suitors were a whole bunch of brash aristocrats who thought Odysseus was long dead, and were now trying to get Penelope to choose one of them to be her husband. The first thing Odysseus did was to watch every movement of the suitors, memorizing their faces and habits. He saw how they mocked the old servants, how ruthlessly they used up their food and wine supplies. All this only strengthened his resolve. Meanwhile, Telemachus, his son, was also aware of what was happening. The young man, brought up on stories of his father's exploits, was ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with Odysseus. Together, they devised a plan to clear the house of unwanted guests. One of the key points of the plan was an archery contest. The grooms, confident of their strength and superiority, invited Odysseus, whom they took for a mere beggar, to take part. They expected an easy victory, but underestimated their opponent. When the time came for the contest, Odysseus picked up his old bow. The groomsmen laughed, thinking the old man would fail. But when the arrow pierced the ring and hit exactly the target, everyone realized that before them stood not an ordinary beggar. The next moment, Odysseus dropped his mask and declared himself master of the house. A real massacre ensued. Armed with a bow and arrow, Odysseus began to methodically destroy the suitors, one by one. Telemachus also joined the fight, supporting his father. The faithful servants joined them, helping to fight off the attackers.